Hello, this is Henrik Wager from Tape 5, the Electro Swing Pioneers, and you are listening to U.S. Modernist Radio.
Mama don't allow no architecture around here. Mama don't allow no architecture around here. Oh, I don't care what Mama don't allow, gonna draw mine modern anyhow. Mama don't allow no architecture around here.
Welcome to U.S. Modernist Radio, where we talk and laugh with people who enjoy, own, create, dream about, preserve, love, and hate modernist architecture, the most exciting and controversial buildings in the world. Elevators are essential to any large modernist building, and these days, even some of the massive modernist houses being built out in L.A. Joining us to discuss the ups and downs of elevators is the Sultan of Schindler, the Oracle of Otis, the Titan of Thyssenkrupp, UNC Charlotte professor Lee Gray, an expert on vertical transportation, and, drumroll please, the only full-time elevator historian in the world. And now, here's Mr. Modernism, George Smart.
Thanks, Tom. There is no elevator to success. You have to take the stairs. Zig Ziglar. You have to assume everything is going to end up online, even if you're alone in a hotel elevator. Megan Fox. Happiness is being stuck in an elevator and discovering the ravishing blonde with you is a liquor salesperson with a case of samples. Johnny Carson. The elevator has become a seminal part of any building of size. And I'm really thrilled today for us to talk with Lee Gray from UNC Charlotte. He's going to help us with some of the ups and downs and the history of this amazing device that takes us from place to place. U.S. Modernist Radio is underwritten by Modernist realtor Angela Roll.
It's where all good sci-fi sagas start. At episode 4, it is a dark time as bulldozers from the evil Galactic Empire destroy millions of modernist houses. Meanwhile, across the galaxy, rebel spies led by Princess Angela Roll have stolen plans for the Empire's ultimate weapon, the Giga Mansion, a house so large it can wipe out entire neighborhoods. Wanted by the Imperial fleet, Princess Angela Roll races towards her home planet, Biarke, hoping to find reinforcements from the ancient order of Psyarch that has been hidden there since the 2100s. If the Gigamansion can be destroyed, Princess Angela will save modernism. But will the Emperor's fleet of architecture review boards stop her? Tune in for the sequel. Meanwhile, back on Earth, her great-great-great-great-great-great-grandmother, modernist realtor Angela Roll, reaches out with a force of architectural training to advise buyers and sellers, plus she's pretty good with a lightsaber. They're getting more realistic all the time. Reach modernist realtor Angela Roll at angelaroll.com. That's ROEHL, or call 919-995-0550. Or just send a hologram. With degrees in architecture and architectural history from Iowa State, UVA, and Cornell, Lee Gray is the David Attenborough of elevators, chronicling their history, use, and evolution. He's a professor of architectural history and the senior associate dean in the UNC Charlotte College of Arts and Architecture. For over 25 years, he's been the world's only full-time elevator historian. He's not just a radical liftist, as he's also written about escalators, dumbwaiters, and moving sidewalks. Lee wrote the definitive elevator text, From Ascending Rooms to Express Elevators, a history of the passenger elevator in the 19th century. And he's written over 200 articles, primarily for one magazine. No, not Playboy, not Field and Stream. It's the magazine you know you want to subscribe to, Elevator World.
Elevator World.
Lee's appeared on the History Channel in Modern Marvels, the National Geographic Channel in Big, Bigger, Biggest Airport, and on PBS in Nova, Trapped in an Elevator. Welcome, Lee.
I'm delighted to be here.
We're delighted to have you.
Lee, I have to ask you first the classic elevator question, okay?
Yes.
So let's say I'm in an elevator by myself going down from the 30th floor, and the cable breaks, and the elevator drops, and the emergency systems don't kick in. Can I survive by jumping up right before it hits the bottom?
No.
Okay, why is that?
Physics work against you. You're still moving quickly, even though you've jumped. And The people much smarter than I am, who are much better at math, will tell you that that scenario would end very badly. The industry professionals will also tell you the odds of that happening are very, very, very small.
Okay.
Because of all the emergency systems, right?
Yes.
Yeah, doesn't it just sort of postpone the impact by about a second?
Yeah, if you're in that scenario, you haven't saved anything by jumping.
Well, a second.
Yeah.
Okay. Savor it.
I believe our research staff tells me there was a Mythbusters episode a number of years ago on cable where they tried to recreate this scenario with some of those test crash dummies and proved, as Lee said, that this is not a good idea. It's not going to help you out any.
But it's also not very likely.
Lee, if you're the only full-time elevator historian, how many part-time elevator historians are there?
That's a great question. The elevator industry is like many industries in that there are members who are very interested in their own history, and therefore they, on occasion, will write an article about it for Elevator World or other publications, or publish something online. An interest in history, fortunately, is not that unusual.
Yeah, I suspect it's just like anything else. If you're into it, you're really into it, right?
Yes, and one of the things that is interesting about this particular industry is how many current professionals are carrying on a family tradition. Their father or another family member was involved in the industry, and they have continued along.
Now, I would think that because an elevator is generally an integral part of the building structure, you know, you can upgrade, say, the computer systems or the rugs or something in a building, but once an elevator is in, it's expensive to replace it or upgrade it in some form or fashion. Isn't that true?
Yes, elevators are very expensive, and which is one reason that, upgrades are very important, but it is the reason that you'll see a major upgrade occurring only when it's really required for the building, or in some instances, if there's a change of use and the type of elevator service has changed. And even then, the upgrade, it often will be as limited as possible. A new cab, for example, new interior, maybe new control systems, but a full system replacement is only done when it's really, really necessary.
Right, because you got to, take off part of the roof or whatever to get the old cab out.
And the motors and all that junk.
All that stuff.
Yeah.
Lee, take us back to the beginning. How did elevators get their start?
Well, so what people typically think about with elevators is, of course, passenger elevators, and they're introduced in the 1860s. However, prior to that, we had lots of freight elevators in factories and in other industrial buildings. Those were quite simply open platforms, no car, no walls, no enclosure, that goods were loaded on and hauled up and down. They weren't for people. When the decision was made to create a version of that to carry passengers, everyone quickly realized, well, we need an enclosure. We need a car to keep people safe going up and down. And the very first passenger elevators were provided as luxury features in what we would now think of as a sort of grand urban hotel. And in the 1860s, that's where, if you visited, say, New York and stayed at the Fifth Avenue Hotel, you were amazed. You were in a modern building that had running water in your hotel room, a bathroom possibly adjacent to your room, and this wonderful machine that would carry you up and down so you didn't have to climb the stairs.
I guess minibars came a little later.
Yeah. Along with refrigerators, Tom. I think that came a little bit.
Well, that too, yeah.
That came a little
Mini
bit later.
ice boxes.
There's some really unusual elevators that I've seen. For instance, I don't know if you've been to the Eiffel Tower, Lee, or the George Washington Masonic National Memorial in Washington, D.C., but these are elevators that are at angles. Is that fairly common?
I've been to the Eiffel Tower and I'm very familiar with those elevators. I'm not familiar with the second example, although now I'm really intrigued. They're not very common. They are difficult to do from an engineering point of view, not Difficult just in terms of they're much, much more expensive than a traditional elevator. But the closest analogy to those are what are often referred to as funiculars. And you may have seen those in some cities where you've got quite a rise between one part of the city and the other, and you'll have, it's like a cable car on an angle going up and down. So that's the closest sort of analogy that many people might be familiar with.
Now, the Eiffel Tower was, what, 1880s approximately?
Yes.
And I know the George Washington National Memorial, which you can visit, was 1923.
Where is that?
It's right near National Airport.
Oh, okay.
In Alexandria, Virginia. A really fascinating building just for many reasons, not just the elevators. Do you know of any angled elevators that are more current, Lee, or unusual like that?
The only one that immediately comes to mind is if you're a gambling fan and you've been to Vegas and you go to the Luxor, the pyramid-shaped building.
Oh, right.
The elevators that take you to the suites in the Luxor pyramid move along an angle.
Wow, just like the ancient Egyptians.
Yes, exactly, and with the same gambling tables.
Right. The St. Louis Arch has a sort of elevator that takes you to the top.
Yeah, that's kind of like the funicular idea that he was saying.
Kind of, yeah. You ride in these sort of gimbal-mounted little pods, if I remember right. There's like a train of them.
Yes. The gentleman who developed that system was actually one of the pioneers in developing automated parking garages where you would drive in and then your car would be lifted by an elevator and put in place. And that's a marvelous experience in the St. Louis Arch, although it's sort of like climbing inside a washing machine.
Yeah, it is. You rock back and forth. They aren't terribly big, but there's a whole bunch of them. It's like a string of beads or something.
Yeah, that's a perfect analogy.
Now, I assume, Lee, that, as there's more competition every year for the world's tallest building, that also generally means the world's tallest elevator, right?
Yes, what many elevator manufacturers and building owners are seeking is, of course, the world's fastest elevator. They're trying to, for an express elevator that would go to an observation deck. That's the sort of pride of place. As far as height with cable-suspended traction elevators, we've pretty much come to the end as far as we can go as far as, the height with those. So now it's not how high does the elevator rise, but it's how fast does it go.
Okay. And is there any limit in terms of physics of this? For instance, if it's 200 stories, has it become too heavy to hold itself up?
The issue is, ironically, it's the weight of the cable. The steel rope that supports the car and the counterweights actually becomes too heavy to support itself, which is one reason that elevator companies have been exploring, and currently Thyssenkrupp is leading the way, developing an elevator system with no cables.
How does that work?
What?
It's predicated on the use of maglev technology. It's the same technology for high-speed trains, where the train, floats on. It's the sort of a magnetic bed,
right? It's sort of frictionless.
Yes. So it's been used in Japan on high-speed trains. I think there are similar trains in Europe as well. So it's leveraging that technology for an elevator where there are no ropes and the car can go up and down and side to side.
Well, that gets to my next question, Lee, which is, I'm a big Star Trek fan, admittedly, and on the show, going back to the original series, their elevators went up and down and side to side. So you're saying that's now possible?
In an elevator test tower, Thyssenkrupp has tested these things, and the name that this is being marketed under is called Multi, M-U-L-T-I. And if you Google multi-elevator, you can find videos of this system operating the test tower going up, and it encounters an interchange section, and then it pauses briefly, and then it moves horizontally. It's crazy complicated, but so far it's worked in the test tower, and Thyssenkrupp has been seeking a client willing to take that elevator system into their building for the first real-life trial run.
So where does the elevator cab go sideways? If a typical skyscraper, there isn't much to go to the right or left.
Interestingly enough, interesting to me because I think about this elevators way, way, way too much. The idea of an elevator that can not only go up and down, but can also move laterally has been one of those holy grail items for the elevator industry. But it also, from my perspective, has been a solution in search of a problem. Because, yes, why would I need to go side to side? One possible use would be, many, many modern skyscrapers are linked by sky bridges.
Oh.
Well, with a system like Multi, and I'm in building A and want to go to building B, but, good Lord, why would I go outside? I could get in the elevator and, go up to the 30th floor and then move horizontally through the building across the sky bridge from building A to building B and then go up to floor 60 in building B, and I haven't had to go anywhere.
But you could also see it like on the Starship Enterprise, because that's so long, it takes you from one end of the ship to the other, as well as up and down. Or even here, on Earth, like if you had a giant aircraft carrier, wouldn't that be great to be able to transverse the length of the ship and then go up into the tower in the same cab?
Wow, isn't that called a subway?
Well,
I'm sorry.
Lee, back in the day when these things started, you needed to have an elevator operator, somebody who pushed the buttons and turned the cranks. And when did that change to self-service?
So the move to self-service elevators coincides almost exactly with the introduction of the modern glass and steel skyscraper in the United States and elsewhere, but primarily in the United States in the 1950s. So New York is a perfect example. Lever House by SOM, the first all-glass-clad skyscraper completed in the United States, featured what were called operatorless elevators because they didn't have an operator. And the reason they weren't introduced until the 50s is it wasn't until then that we had the technology, in essence, to think of programming the elevators so that they would operate the way we need them to. And most of us think, well, they just go up and down. The challenge with elevators in an office building is traffic flow. Everybody arrives at roughly the same time in the morning, and they all have to get up to their offices very quickly. The end of the day, everybody leaves at approximately the same time. They have to get out quickly. And during the day, you have to provide traffic for whatever the purpose of the building is. That requires either people to drive the elevators on a set schedule to meet those needs, or the ability to program it automatically. So by the 1950s, we have that ability. So Lever House has operatorless elevators. It's wonderful. The building opens. People walk in. There are reports of them stepping into these wonderful modern elevators and stepping right back out and saying, "Where's the operator? I'm not driving this thing."
I don't trust it.
Even though prior to that, all the operator at that point had been doing was pressing buttons, it took most of the 1950s for the American public to become accustomed to, for lack of a better phrase, driving their own elevator. The advantage the industry had is they were only in brand new buildings. So as new buildings were built, the public gradually became aware of it, although that's like many, many of the amenities that modernist buildings had. People encountered them for the first time in the newest buildings, and it was a really interesting adjustment.
So it's something that we really take for granted now, but was really newfangled in, say, 1953?
Yeah.
Now, the very first elevators that you were describing, the ones that carried goods and then people back in the mid-1800s, how were they powered? Was it steam?
So initially, yes. So steam engines first. And then the story of what's powering elevators, I've always thought of it as sort of like a tennis match kind of thing. So steam-powered elevators were drum machines, and they could only go so high, 5-6 stories reasonably. And it's sort of like saying to architects, here's this technology. And architects said, great, we can build this high with that. And then someone, architects or clients, said, well, we'd really like to build higher. And the industry said, okay, we need a different technology. And that's when hydraulic elevators replaced steam.
Oh.
Because they could go higher. Now, I'm not in this instance. Most people today think of what are a direct plunger hydraulic machine. Sometimes they're in you can see the plunger rising up, and they're sort of an object of interest in a building. These were the easiest way to describe it is they were roped hydraulic machines that could easily go 25, 30 stories without any problem. So that technology is sort of lobbed over the net, and architects said, great, we can now go 25, 30 stories. And then we get close to the turn of the century, and architects and developers and other people said, we'd really like to go higher. So the industry said, great. By now we've got an electric motor that has been developed and perfected for other uses. And they say, well, here's an electric traction machine that can easily go 100 floors if you want, or higher. So many, many people say, that the elevator made the skyscraper possible. It is just as accurate to say the desire to build skyscrapers made the modern elevator possible. The story is really interesting, and they go hand in hand.
And it looks like, from my little research into elevator history, there were some key strikes by elevator operators in New York in the 40s and 50s that kind of propelled this movement towards automation.
That certainly contributed to it, and one of the, from perhaps a 21st century perspective, very, very striking things about the advertisements for operator-less elevators that appeared in the leading architectural journals in the 1950s. Most of them, in the context of the ad, said, here's how much money you're going to save when you can fire all your operators.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Then they can all become milkmen.
Yeah, another great profession.
Right, with a bright future.
So the companies we mentioned earlier, Otis, Schindler, and how do you pronounce it? Thyssenkrupp?
Thyssenkrupp.
Thyssenkrupp are all in the top 10 worldwide, especially in the U.S. Are they the ones doing most of the sort of R&D for the future, or is there some little scrappy, Elon Musk company that's doing something really wild?
Well, first it would be important to add at least two more names. Kone, which is a Finnish company, is also one of the leading companies, and they've been doing a lot of really interesting research. And in Asia, there are a number of companies, but Mitsubishi is leading the charge there in many ways in terms of innovation. And not in an elevator innovation, but escalator. If you've ever ridden a spiral escalator, and they're really, really cool, Mitsubishi is the company that pioneered that development.
Wow.
So where is there a spiral elevator,
Not
Lee?
at the mall around here.
Okay, so a spiral escalator, again, there are other places, but I'll go back to Vegas.
Escalator,
if
right,
you visit the shops at Caesars, at the Forum, there are spiral escalators that link all of the floors. And it's really cool. There are some, and I'm blanking on where they are in San Francisco, and I think they just a spiral escalator was recently opened in, now this is going to sound crazy, but someone told me it's at a Starbucks in Chicago. Now, take that for what it's worth.
Where do the steps go when they get to the top?
So they work in exactly the same way as a normal escalator, but they go up in an arc. So it's not a full 180-degree arc, but close to that. So they go up in a curve and then come back down below in a curve, just like a normal straight escalator. But you can imagine the technical complexity of that,
right?
Which is why you don't see many of them, because they are crazy expensive.
But they also probably take less space in the building.
Yes, because you can, if you put the two of them together, you basically got a circle in plan.
Yeah, that's amazing. And it looks like Mitsubishi kind of has the corner of the market on these?
They may be the only one marketing them at this point, primarily because it's such a niche market. I mean, I don't know how many they would sell a year. Not many, because they're much, much more expensive than a regular escalator.
Yeah, this article I'm looking at says there are about 100 in the world.
Okay.
The first one was installed at the San Francisco Center in California. I believe I saw one in Europe in a store, a little small one. I mean, it only went up one floor. So, and I didn't get a chance to get on it because we were driving by on a bus. But, it just stands out immediately as just something really interesting and exciting.
Oh, yeah, they're great fun. I mean, it's... But you have to remember, I'm not your average tourist looking at these things, I get ridiculously excited.
Oh, well, yeah, of course. Now, what was first, the elevator or the escalator?
Oh, the elevator.
The elevator.
Escalators, very early versions are installed in the 1890s. The escalator is really introduced to the world on a large scale in 1900 at the Paris exhibition. And there were maybe 30 or 35 escalators employed at that international exhibition.
So for the super fast elevators, getting back to elevators.
Yes.
The ones that they're trying to get off the drawing board and into reality now, how do you deal with basically your ears popping? You know what I mean?
Oh, yes. Yeah. Basically the same way that you deal with it in an airplane. The elevator cars, one, are streamlined top and bottom so that they'll move more efficiently through the shaft. And when the doors close, the car is slightly pressurized in exactly the same way that you would do. Because if you didn't do that, then you couldn't go as fast as they might want you to. So it's the exact same approach, because until that started happening, that was always a limit on how fast an elevator car could go. Right. And also, it's not just how fast it goes. And you may have experienced this every once in a while. If you feel that sort of sinking feeling in your stomach when an elevator takes off too quickly or stops too quickly, and that can be very unsettling. That's another really important part of how elevators work, is smooth takeoff and smooth stop. In the 19th century, they actually often referred to elevator sickness.
Like motion sickness.
Yes, same exact thing.
Now, when I was growing up, all the elevators had a hatch in the top of the cab. And there were often instructions like, emergency exit here, press button, et cetera, et cetera. And, of course, there had been lots of movies where your action hero escapes through the hatch. But it seems like in recent years, no more hatches. Is that out of favor now?
That's a great question. I don't know the answer to that in terms of...
Have we stumped the elevator band here?
Wow.
Yeah, in terms of, there has to be a way provided for emergency exit. Sometimes it is, and that's why, there's the button in the car that says if the car stops, push the button. It's supposed to work, connect you to someone. The most important rule is you are in the safest place you can be in the elevator car. Don't leave until somebody tells you to leave. And the reason I say that is sometimes a car might stop and, the doors, you could pry the door open and you could see, well, I'm halfway between floors. I can crawl out. Don't do that.
Oh, well, tell Keanu Reeves.
Yeah.
And Bruce Willis, I think, too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, actually, they didn't do that. I mean, Keanu, actually in Speed in the front, he never goes in the elevator car. He just ties a big cable to it to prevent it from falling down.
Okay.
Here's a question I'm hoping that you would know, being the expert. How did people get in the habit of not looking at each other when they're in the elevator?
All right. So there are different takes on that, but it all seems to come down to how we behave in buildings. And we're all familiar with, buildings have rooms. And most of the time when we enter a room, we assess what kind of room it is, what activity is taking place there, and for lack of a better phrase, we know how we're supposed to behave. We know what the social protocols are. And now we go into a building, and these little doors slide open, and we step into this little box, which is basically a little room. And I'm fine by myself. I can stand in the middle of that little room while it goes up and look at the security camera and wave or whatever I want to do, and I'm perfectly happy until someone else enters my little room. And especially in the United States, well, I have a pretty big sense of personal space. I really don't want you standing next to me, and I don't know you, so I'm going to move to my corner. You're going to move to yours, and now we're both going to stare at the front, watching the little indicator ticks by until we get to our floors. We've been doing that basically since operatorless elevators, but even before then. And part of it is I face the door because, well, that's how I get out, and I need to watch the door. And also, even with operators, I'm watching for the indicator in the car when I'm getting close to my floor, so I know if I need to wedge my way out or exit on time. But a lot of it comes down to they're very weird, uncomfortable social spaces.
Yeah. Or if you're in one of those weird elevators where there's doors on both sides and you don't know which one is going to open up. That's where the excitement comes from riding in the elevator. Now, why is it sometimes in a hotel, say there's a bank of 4 elevators, and I want to go up to my room, and they have little numbers on each of them, and none of them seems to be moving in my direction for like 5 minutes? What's going on there? Huh?
Okay. So, well, there's 2 things going on. One, in hotels, rightly or wrongly, there's often an assumption that people riding the elevators are not in a huge hurry like you would be in an office building. And so they're not going to arrive as quickly. And the second thing is, if the traffic control system is not adequately designed, you'll end up waiting a long time. And part of that is, whatever computer is running the elevators is either not set properly or simply is not doing its job. Also, what can happen, and I'm sure you've seen this, and let's say you're there for a convention and you get in the elevator and suddenly there are other people coming, so you stand and hold the door open.
Oh, yeah.
While everybody runs down the hall. Well, it's going to stay there until you and all your friends are in the elevator. And nothing can do anything about that because you're standing in the door preventing it from moving.
Now, did you see the recent series called Foundation, the Isaac Asimov novel?
Unfortunately, I did not. I'm a little familiar with the story.
So Foundation is a novel that was written, I think 60 or 70 years ago by Isaac Asimov, very famous science fiction writer. And in the recent adaptation of the book, which has taken forever to put in place, the beginning of the story is there's a huge elevator that goes from the planet's surface all the way out into space. Now, I understand that people have thought about this for Earth, right?
Yes. There was, I think it was a Russian scientist who very early 20th century first posited that if you placed something in geosynchronous orbit, in a stationary orbit high enough that it would always stay above the same place on Earth, that then you could connect that spot on Earth with that object in space and then ride an elevator up and down.
Has anybody tried to make that happen? Is it in the works somewhere?
There are lots of people working on this. Again, if you Google space elevator, there were, and the pandemic may have halted them, maybe the last 8 to 10 years, annual conferences on the idea of a space elevator. Allegedly, there are some companies looking at this. The fundamental challenge is manufacturing a cable strong enough to go from a spot on Earth up to an object in geosynchronous orbit. And they're looking at, I think it's nanocarbon fiber technology. But so far, we've only managed to make, maybe a foot of that or something. It's something like that. That's not quite right. But we haven't figured out how to manufacture that kind of cable at scale so that then we could link the two objects. But the idea is then no more rockets, no more waste in that way. You would just keep sending these massive elevators up, and then you would build your space station that way. And if you could do that, you could build rockets in space.
Mm.
But don't things in geosynchronous orbits have to be way, way, way out there?
Yes. Yes.
It's a long way from the surface to wherever that orbit is.
Yeah.
I wonder, so Lee, do magnets work in space? Can you maglev that thing up into...
It's on my shelf, or in my bookcase, rather, are a bunch of books on the space elevator that I've glanced at. I don't recall the technology. An advantage you would have is you could probably use solar power to drive it after you get past a certain point, or perhaps for quite a bit. And it's a fascinating concept. Of course, one of the other dangers is, imagine, wherever point in the middle of nowhere. They're typically thinking an island, in the Pacific or something, and this cable going all the way up. Well, and most recently, I think they proposed, it could be a ship. I'm not quite sure how that works, because, what if there's a hurricane?
Yeah.
Or what if somebody flies an airplane into the cable?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's all kinds of operational aspects of this that you'd have to work out. And in the Foundation adaptation, they destroy the elevator and it falls to the planet and causes havoc. So there's that too.
Yeah.
What are the oldest elevators still in service that you know of?
They're early 1900s. They're electric drum machines in fairly low-rise buildings. They're about 100 years old. You can find them sometimes in old industrial or a few old hotels, perhaps. There aren't many left, and I apologize. I can't say, well, here's the oldest one I know of. I don't remember.
But I assume the operators are all gone.
Well, actually, no. There are a few left in the United States, not many, because many of the elevators have been modified. So one of the oldest elevators, it has been refurbished, but the car is there and the controls are there, was actually one of the first elevators to be placed in a private residence, and that's at the Biltmore Estate.
Oh, near Asheville, North Carolina.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, there are two elevators in Biltmore. One was placed in there for the use of the Vanderbilts and their guests, and it's an early push-button elevator, and they were originally, push-button was designed only for residential use. And also, because it's Biltmore, there's a separate elevator that would have been used to carry guest trunks and luggage up to their rooms. And that elevator has an old rheostat control in it, a knob that you sort of move back and forth. And the challenge with that is automatic leveling systems don't come into the 1920s except for very simple ones. And that was a simple one was used on the push-button elevator. The freight elevator, which was recently luggage elevator, rather, Biltmore, which was rehabbed and repaired sometime in the last 10 years, has no automatic leveling system. So if you're driving that, it's all up to you to get it level. And the one and only time they foolishly let me drive that elevator, I missed by 6 inches getting level with the floor.
Ooh.
Well, because you're looking down and you're trying to make a judgment of it's really hard, which gives you a new appreciation for the skill of the operators.
Yeah, for what they used to do.
Yep.
My last question, Lee. Back in the day when we were kids, I learned this little hack on an elevator. That if you got an elevator on most of them and pressed a floor, say floor 5, from the lobby, and you held down the door open or door close button, you would be an express elevator. It would override you to take you to the floor. That still work?
No, I don't think so, but that's, I've actually not heard that hack. I've had lots of questions about the door open and door close actually do anything. Do those buttons actually do anything, or are they just there to make you feel good? They do work. They do. I'm not familiar with that hack. I know who to ask in the industry. I mean, I would be surprised if it's still possible. However, any technology, can be fiddled around with, and sometimes there are, you can have the best design in the world, and someone says, oh, well, if you do this and this, it will do something else. So that it could be true. I don't know.
Be like an Easter egg.
Yeah. I think it was originally in hospitals they figured it out, or had it for hospitals. So you could override other people's requests to go to the floor. If you had to get your patient to the 5th or 10th floor, you would hold down that button and boom, you would go right there, even if there were other people, calling for the cab was the idea.
No, that's okay. This is wonderful. Now I have something new to look up.
Well, Lee, this has been really fun. Thank you so much for joining us.
Well, it's been my pleasure.
Thanks for listening. U.S. Modernist Radio is underwritten by Modernist Realtor Angela Roll. Okay, Tom, level us out.
Visit usmodernist.org's massive archives to listen to past shows, discover documentation of 12,000 significant modernist houses, and access 4 million pages of classic 20th century architecture magazines. U.S. Modernist Radio is produced by Soundtracks Recording Studios in Raleigh, North Carolina. Our theme song is performed by George Smart and Robinson Earl. Rogue archivist Carrie Cesarino researches guests while her kids punch all the elevator buttons at Daddy's office. U.S. Modernist Radio is a production of Modernist Archive Incorporated, a nonprofit educational archive for the documentation, preservation, and promotion of modernist residential design. I'm Tom Guild. George and I will be back soon with another transcending, uplifting, shall we say, mood-elevating edition of U.S. Modernist Radio.